Hello, friends. Welcome aboard the Round Trip Stories podcast, where we share stories of moving around the world and back again, reflecting on the lessons we've learned along the way. My name is Tracy.
And my name is Melissa, and we are so glad you're joining us for today's episode. Our guest today is adult third culture kid Sherene Joseph, a writer and storyteller born in Tamil Nadu, India. From 5 to 17 years old, Sherene grew up in the Middle East in the Sultanate of Oman, and then moved back to India at age 17 for university studies. Sherene later married and moved to the U.S. with her own family. In part one of her interview with us, she shares her stories of growing up in the Middle East in the 1980s. Sherene tells stories about her family being rooted in their community within the Islamic country and truly making a home. So buckle your seatbelts and make sure your tray tables and seats are in their upright positions as part one of Sherene's round trip story gets ready for takeoff.
Welcome, Sherene Joseph. We're so happy to have you on our Round Trip Stories podcast.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, I was delighted, Sherene, when you reached out to us because of a mutual friend, Dorina, who's part of the Redbud Writers Guild, which shout out to the amazing Redbuds, and, connected us, and we're so glad she did.
Well, and we're starting a new season now about third culture kids, TCKs, which is this amazing group of people who have lived part or all of their childhood outside of their passport country. Mm-hmm. And so you are a unique group of people, and we just want to hear your round trip stories.
So Sherene, as we get started, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your life now?
Okay, yeah. So I live in Dallas, Texas, originally from India. So about myself, I am in my mid-40s, a Christ follower, a wife, a mother, a chauffeur, a chef, a cleaner, housekeeper, all sorts of things. Somewhere along the way, a midlife crisis sent me off to seminary. And of late, I have been talking more about my immigrant experience. And incidentally, I did not actually know the term third culture kids up until about 2.5 years ago.
Wow.
So I always viewed it as an immigrant experience. I just didn't have that terminology. And when I heard that term and I understood what it meant and I went on a deep dive into just all the books and the resources of it, I was like, oh my gosh, this is what I am. And so it's given me a lot of verbiage for just my life and the experiences that I've had.
Yeah, it makes sense that you would think of your experience as an immigrant experience, but it's not as straightforward as that.
Yeah, so it's both, right? Immigrant, third culture.
So tell us a little bit now about your family and where you grew up.
So I'm a single child. I was born in the south of India in the state of Tamil Nadu. The main city there is Chennai. Lived there with my mother, my father, my granny, and then around 1984, my dad moved to the Middle East. And back in that time, there were a lot of people from India who were moving to the Middle East for better jobs, So there was just a better opportunity to make a better income, and you could save more of it. You could send it back to your family, people who had need. And this wasn't engineers and doctors necessarily. These were more like people in business and marketing and entrepreneurs, like smaller jobs, because there was a lot of trade between India and the Middle Eastern countries. And so my dad moved there, and then after a year, he took my mom and me with him. So I lived there from the age of, I think, 4 till I graduated from high school in Oman. Yeah, in the Sultanate of Oman, the capital city, Muscat. But our families lived in India, and so we would come back to visit India every summer and every other winter to see grandparents and uncles and aunts and cousins.
All right, well, we are really thrilled to hear these stories that are going to fill in the details for us. So, Sherene, tell us a story about your growing up abroad as a third culture kid, TCK.
Yeah. So I think this just prepping for this podcast has been kind of good. And I did a little bit of deep dive into all the photo albums, which my mother had sent to me a few years ago. And looking at these old pictures, which were like yellow and sticky in,
Yeah.
in places. And when I look back about my life growing up as a third culture kid, and even though I didn't know what a third culture kid was, it was really the only life that I knew. In a way, it was the idyllic childhood, but then it was the only childhood that I had. So I don't necessarily know other people's childhood, right? So what I have in my memory is what I know. And so life in Oman, all my childhood years, school friends, birthday parties, church life, singing in the choir or going to the beach and picnics. And so it was just, that was life. And it was a normal life, We went to school for 5 days a week. And obviously, this is the Middle East. So we went to school from Saturday to Thursday. The weekend was Thursday and Friday. So Saturday was the first day of the school week.
Interesting.
So you go to school from Saturday, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday is the weekend. So Thursday was usually just a half a day of school sometimes, and sometimes we didn't have school. And we went to church on Fridays.
Okay.
Because Fridays were the holiday there. So especially when I came back to India, I had to get used to the fact that Saturdays and Sundays are the weekend. So obviously going into a foreign country, and especially to an Islamic nation, when we first got there, most of the friends that we had were people who worked with my dad. My mom would cook these big meals, and many of these men who were living life as bachelors would just come home and, have a meal. And that was our circle. And then my parents founded church, an Indian church. It was actually in the same language that we spoke. It was more of a fellowship, like not a church per se, more of a weekly fellowship. And they gathered together on Friday afternoons. And so that just became our family, Actually, the Sultan at that time had studied in Bombay and he had studied in the UK. And so he was a well-traveled king. And so he genuinely liked the Indian people and he wanted them to have a safe place to worship. So they had built this kind of a facility where there were plenty of rooms and like sanctuaries, but there was just a facility for different denominations to rent space. And back then, so this is the 1980s. So back then, there was a lot of trading and there were a lot of people because of the colonial rule. See, all these countries had the colonial influence on them.
The British colonial influence. Okay.
The British, yeah. So the British were already there. There were plenty of Brits in Oman, and they worked as teachers, college professors, and of course, a few of them came as priests. The Anglican Church was already there. So you had the Protestant Church in Oman. So all the Christian literature, the books, and everything that we had access to came from England. So over time, you had the Brits who came, you had plenty of Americans who came because Halliburton was a huge presence in the Middle East, oil company. All of the Middle Eastern countries have oil or had oil. And so, of course, because of them, Americans came and they lived in a compound because Halliburton staff had a compound where they lived in. So, yes, and that goes back to the colonial roots where even the Arabs, they favored the Americans and the Brits over the Indians and the Pakistanis and the Bangladeshis who came there. So there was just a respect and a reverence that was given to the people who were white versus the Indians, Pakistanis, and the Bangladeshis who were brown-skinned, right? And the Indians were probably higher on that rank because most of them were educated, and then you have the Pakistanis, and then you have the Bangladeshis. So there was just this unspoken caste system which kind of floated around the Middle East in the 80s quite a bit.
I when I went overseas for the first time, I thought, oh, I'm escaping my social group, my social strata in my country. I'm going to be like anonymous, right? If I go to another country. But when you go to another country, you just become another part of another social strata, which include internationals and different international groups from different places. And there's always social strata. Wherever we go, you can't really avoid it. Well, tell us about something that was hard growing up in the Sultanate of Oman.
Yeah, I think school was hard. I was just, I just like to have fun in school. And I mean, I was a good student, I was good in certain subjects. But I think the way that life worked there was everybody came there for a better chance at life and to give their children the best opportunity that they couldn't possibly give them in India, or maybe they just didn't have the financial means to give them. So moms and dads, they worked really hard and they wanted their children to do really well. And so I think for my mother especially, she wanted me to be an engineer or a doctor, which was what everybody in the 80s and the 90s wanted their children to be. I think every child in India was either sent to medical school or engineering school in that season. The fine art were not considered very important. And so they did push me fairly hard. And that definitely it affected you could call it mental health. I felt like a failure most of the time because I just wasn't a very good student.
And I have a question. What kind of school did you attend when you were in the Sultanate?
So in the Middle East, now there's a lot more schools. But back then for Indians, so in India, we have two different boards of education. So you have a central board, which is kind of like governed by the central government, and you have schools that come under the central board. So all of them will have the same style of teaching and the same syllabus. But then you also have a state board. So India has many states. So each state has their own state system of education.
Okay.
And those schools are state governed, and those schools would have a different system of education and a different syllabus. But the central schools are the same across the country. So these central schools were there in almost all the Middle Eastern countries.
Okay.
People had come there and they had started them. So I went to a school called Indian Central School.
Okay.
So it was an Indian Central Board education. So that's why when I left, I could seamlessly transition into college in India,
right?
Because it had prepped me for that.
I see.
Right. It makes me think of how my husband, for the 7 years that he lived in Panama, he and his siblings attended Department of Defense schools. So they were they were schools that were set up and run by the U.S. military.
Yes.
For children of families that were stationed overseas. And so they received essentially a United States American education in another country.
Yeah.
Well, Sherene, tell us a story about something you loved about growing up in Oman specifically.
I think I had fun with all my school friends. I just loved all the friends that I had made. A high school friend of mine actually lives in Dallas. She's a doctor and she lives here.
That's amazing.
But I still remember going to her house and her mom would make us dinner with, her mom made these amazing sandwiches with like white bread, fried onions, cheese, and fried sausages. It was like just a thing which her mother had come up with. But,
sounds delicious.
It tasted really good. When you're like 14 years old and you're hungry, it tasted really good. And we had a lot of fun in school. We played all the time. There was no internet. There was limited television shows which were in English because obviously we lived in the Middle East. So there were maybe 4 shows a week which came in English, which everybody would watch.
Well, what were they? What were those shows?
So I grew up on The Cosby Show. The Cosby Show was huge. And then there was a show called Alf. about
yes.
an alien that
Yes,
came to
I
live
remember
in an
Alf.
American suburb.
Yes.
Yes.
There was a show called Small Wonder about a
Yep.
guy who invented a robot.
Yep.
And she is like their daughter.
Yes.
So these were the few shows that came, and they came once a week, like, every Wednesday night for
Right.
45 minutes. So
Right.
we didn't have anything else to do. We had videotapes to watch, but then you'd have to go to a video store to rent them, and they were super expensive. So you played with your friends. You
Yes.
played outside the apartments.
It was lovely.
Yeah, you played all the time, and you made up games, and you played hide and go seek, and so that's what we did. Even at church, we would finish church, and then all that we would do was just play in the parking lot. We just run and play, and the parking lots were first sandy, and then as time went by, they got paved. They got nicer, and it was just a very innocent childhood. We didn't have any exposure to the big bad world. So
Okay.
it was just a really good childhood.
Sounds
And you've written here that picnics during the Eid holiday. Am I saying that right? And can you tell us
Yes.
what the Eid is?
Yes, so Eid is basically the festival for the Muslims where they celebrate the birth of the Prophet Muhammad,
Okay.
and so Eid is a huge festival in any Islamic nation. So it comes at the culmination of the month of Ramadan. So a month of Ramadan, and then we come to Eid, and it's a huge festival for them. So usually we will have at least a weekend plus 3 to 4 days off.
Yay.
Yeah. So what do?
Yeah.
You go on a picnic. You go on
Yes,
picnics.
That's
And
right.
Middle East, also ocean, right? You have the ocean on the coastline, and so we would go to the beach for picnics, and everybody would pack lots of food. And so we had this family friend, and he passed away a number of years ago. His name was Stephen, and he always had access to some of the really cool gardens. And so we would go to these gardens and you'd have a picnic, you'd sit and eat and walk around, like see all the fruit trees, take a nap under the trees. A lot of these gardens had irrigation systems, because it's crops, right? So you have to water all the plants, but all the water would come from a main water tank. There was like this huge concrete tank which would pump the water out into the different places of the garden, and usually you could jump in the tank. Wasn't super deep, maybe 6 feet.
Okay.
But it was usually big enough for 25 to 30 people to jump in.
Oh my goodness.
Oh, how
And
fun.
yeah, it's super cool. I mean, I know I have pictures in those tanks, but I can't find them. So we would just jump in and eat watermelon, and the Middle East is hot.
Yes.
Really, really hot, and the water would be so cold, but we would play in that, and we would go to when I lived in the Middle East, Oman was just getting developed.
Okay.
So I saw the building of parks. I saw the building of recreation centers, places for families to go. And so now, even when I went, the last time I was in Oman was in 2011. It had changed so much.
I
There was
bet.
so much more construction and so many more places for families to go with their kids. But back then, there were 2 parks. You could only go to one of the 2 parks, and you could play there all day. And I think what I took away from that is everybody had time on their hands. Nobody had an agenda. So you could kick back on a picnic blanket for 12 hours a day
Oh my.
and talk to your friends and play games.
Yeah, for those special holidays.
And these were adults. They all worked full-time jobs. But there was no agenda. Like, there was no project in the garage, or
Yeah.
I got to go exercise, or any of that. It was just
Yeah.
organic community, which kind of grew.
And valuing spending time together.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Just being together. That is
Being together. That's all. We didn't have any dreams to achieve or goals to make. It was just, we had time. That's all we
Yeah.
did.
What a gift. So tell us, Sherene, about when you realized that you were a TCK, a third culture kid?
Yeah, I think, like I said in the beginning, I probably realized I was a TCK only a couple of years ago. But I had this feeling, I always say that I'm like a square peg in a round hole or a round peg in a square hole, a peg that never quite fit anywhere. All of my experiences as a child had made me think in a different way, feel a different way, and operate in a different way, even as a teenager, 16, 17 years old. And then when I came to India to go to college and stuff, I knew I was the oddball, but I didn't know what to do with the oddity in me. There were like things that I preferred and quirks that I had and expectations that I had. I mean, I went from being in a high school where air conditioning is mandatory in the Middle East in all buildings because it's extremely hot and it's a health risk to not have air conditioning. I went from being in a building with air conditioning and indoor plumbing, and the college that I did my undergrad in, it's a good school, but we had no air conditioning in India, which is pretty hot.
I was going to say, it's really hot.
It's really hot.
India.
We only had fans. Inevitably, at least 3 days of a 5-day school week, the power would go out. And I just knew in my head that I couldn't complain because this was life and I needed to get used to it. And so I did get used to it. I learned to appreciate the good things and learn from my friends how to handle life in the south of India and how to talk and how to get things done. And because my parents were still in the Middle East, I wasn't completely disconnected from it. I was in India for college, but as soon as the summer vacation began, I would get on a flight and I would go back to Oman for the next 2 months. So I spent my summers in Oman and then I came back to India again. So I did that all through undergrad and through grad school. So I wasn't completely disconnected. I still had one foot there in that culture, so to speak. And it would make me feel like an oddball when I went back to Oman because I had spent 6 months over here. And I'd be like, okay, we can just buy that in India. And people would be like, oh, you get a better quality here. I'm like, why not? It's the same thing, Up until I finished grad school, I don't think I ever bought a tube of toothpaste in India. That's like 5 years of toothpaste that came from the Middle East. Yeah, I think for my mom and dad, it's I do believe that they recently have gone through the process of maybe grieving the fact that they don't live in Oman anymore and appreciating the blessings of life in India. It took them a while because they were there for 25 years, and that's a significant period of their life. So it took my parents a while to appreciate the best of both worlds. So they found India complicated. I married a guy who he calls himself the son of the soil.
Why is that?
Because he was raised in the same town as his dad was raised, as his grandfather was raised.
That he
on
has
both
roots,
sides.
Roots.
Maternal and paternal grandparents, and he was raised in the same house that his dad was raised and that his grandfather built.
Wow.
So there's a deep connection to this
place.
Is where I belong. And it's not just India. He comes from a specific town. And so there's just a lot of love and a lot of memories and a connection to these are my people and this is where I belong. And so he's got his own story on that. But when we met, he took great pride in being Indian. And so I think I made a conscious choice to appreciate India. And he taught me a lot of things about India, which I hadn't seen India in that light because I was seeing it from my parents' eyes. And I needed to learn to see it from his eyes or my cousins or my friends from college. And I started to appreciate more about the things about India. And I loved Oman. I still do.
Of course.
You know, there's part of the Arab culture and Islamic architecture and the topography of the Middle East, which I still genuinely love. You know, I just love all of that because it's beautiful. So while I missed it, you know, I learned to love India and I learned to appreciate being Indian. And so it's taken me a few decades to learn to hold that in balance, to hold that tension, and to appreciate both of it. I didn't need to hate one to love the other. So
Yeah.
I can love both.
So our last question for now is just tell us, what do you value most about your story?
Yeah, I think I have learned to be I don't know if the word is adaptable, but I'm always curious about other people's stories and their culture. I don't necessarily go into a room and think that everybody has the same story. I think in general, the way that I view people always is that, well, each person has a different story. And we all do, whether we live in the US or we live in India or anywhere else. But the people that I met in my childhood and living in a country like Oman, being an expat, in those countries, you didn't just grow up in a bubble of Christians. You know, I grew up being exposed to diversity from the north of India to the south of India, people from other countries. Because my mother worked in the Ministry of Health, I was always around a lot of people from the Philippines because they were nurses and they were staff there. So a lot of the Filipinos, I grew up with them. So I was just exposed to a lot of diverse cultures, even inside of India, which if I had grown in my home state of India, I wouldn't have been exposed to. You know, I knew North Indians and South Indians and, you know, Goa and Mumbai and all of those places. And so, and of course, all of the Omanis that my mother knew from her 25 years of working in a hospital, you know, the people that she met and she introduced us to, and people from diverse faith backgrounds.
Yeah.
It wasn't just a Christian bubble, right? You have the Hindus, the Jains, the Muslims. I've just really appreciated all of that, and it's made me who I am. And I think I lost track of that for a little bit in my life, and the last few years I've tried to really value that and be appreciative of what that has taught me and kind of made me. So I think that's what I value the most.
Thank you, Sherene, for sharing your round-trip stories from growing up as a third culture kid in Oman. As you reflect back on your childhood, you describe when focused on relationships through your Indian church and school communities and those of your parents' work. Although school could be a challenge, you also have so many warm memories of days playing after church or relaxing in gardens or picnics by the beach. You focus on the abundance of time, beauty of the landscape, variety of faiths and ethnicities, and order of the Oman of your childhood. You have a high value of being exposed to people from around the world, and you learn that you truly could love the place where you grew up and the country of your passport at the same time. So what happened when Sherene returned to India? You'll have to make a return trip to our podcast for part 2 of Sherene's TCK round trip story.
Want the podcast equivalent of early boarding and first class seating? Be sure to subscribe to the Round Trip Stories podcast in your favorite podcast app and sign up for our email list at roundtripstories.com so you'll never miss an episode. We believe that sharing stories helps our understanding of the world grow larger while the distance between us grows smaller.
As this episode lands, we hope these stories have encouraged you, helped you find some more of your belongings, and made your baggage a little lighter. Thanks so much for listening, friends. We'll see you next time.